Hey folks, it's Keith from Outlaw Speed Shop, and in this episode, I'm going to be tackling this Pontiac Fiero. Yes, I said Fiero. It's a metal base, metal car, and plastic interior, sunroof. It's not the most desirable car in the world, but that's why I'm going to be hacking the hell out of it. So I like to spend some time on Instagram for inspiration, and it struck the other day. This Stoke Models MR2 was insane. This is the most amazing build I've seen in a long time. And that's a mid-engined, two-seater car. And I thought, you know what? I think it'd be kind of cool to do that with a Pontiac Fiero because I had multiple Pontiac Fieros and no Toyota MR2s. So the first thing I did is I tried to cut it pretty much from the door, the rear of each door back, and then leave a little bit on the side sail panel. And in order to do that, I also have to cut the interior pretty much from the vents back, and I'll smooth it out later. The next step that I decided to do was to lay it out, and I usually fly by the seat of my pants, and I kind of did that on this, but for the most part, I did at least make an attempt to be as precise as I could. And that's why I'm laying it out on a piece of tape that I will use later to put on a piece of styrene to make a base to make my job hopefully a lot easier. To get this pretty much on the ground, I end up really cutting out the wheel wells in the front. And the amount that I cut off was a lot more than you just saw. So I also have to lower the axle height, so I'm also going to have to cut into where it sits. And I use this Loctite tack constantly to help when I'm retrofitting. It just makes things easier, and I don't have to glue anything down, and I know where, I can always take it off later. It just makes things a lot easier and makes fabricating a lot easier, at least in my opinion. So I kind of did the wheel wells, and then I put it together and realized how much more I actually had to take out because I wanted this thing on the ground. And the carbide ball ends for my Dremel tool really make short work of it. So that was like the best investment I'd ever made. Well, not the best investment, but it's up there anyways. So now I'm taking that tape and I'm going to put it on this thin, I want to say it's 1 or 2 millimeters styrene. It's not super thick. That's not what I wanted anyway, so this stuff works really well. And then I'm just carefully using my ruler and a very sharp brand new X-Acto blade to cut out everything and use that as my template, the tape that is, and go from there and try to slowly make what I think is going to work. And I always cut a little bit on the high side just in case, because it's a lot easier to trim down than it is to put back. So, because you can only go so far. And this worked out really well. I'm glad I took the time on this project to plan it out. I usually try to go a little faster on projects, mainly because of the YouTube schedule. But this one, I made sure I took my time. And it actually took me a few weeks of a little bit here and a little bit there. So here I'm using a small cutoff wheel to get rid of the front mounting tab because it's in the way. Once again, because it's sitting so low, it was actually hitting the styrene base. That's how low it went. You can see here the frame rails in the back I glued underneath the venting. Now I'm going to mount this copper or brass tubing, which I believe is 1/16 ID, to use as my axle housing. And I've been doing this forever. It works out really well. I mark off the length I need. I grind down the end a little bit with the cutoff wheel because you can never get it really perfectly clean with a cutoff disc. Open up the holes with a knife. Make sure you stab your thumb. And then I have piano wire that I purchased, 4 years ago, I think. And I just use little pieces of it, and I'll put that inside. It's the same diameter as actual axles. Wow, say that 5 times fast. And then I'll take the Dremel tool and I'll cut until I see sparks. And that gives me little grooves that I can put glue in that'll glue the 2 axle pieces in because I'll cut them in half. And that, again, gives me the opportunity to use that axle tube from mock-up, because I'll actually stick the piano wire all the way through to mount my tires. And that just gives me a little bit of flexibility. And then when I'm painting, I can actually take my rims off in tires without having to mask them off. But right now, I'm kind of making sure that the axles are short enough that one's not hitting the other one and pushing one out when I push one in. Then after that, I decided to try to mimic a little bit of a turbo. Now, I don't do these kind of motors. This is supposed to be some sort of futuristic punk, cyberpunk type of car. I know nothing is scale accurate, so I don't really want to hear it from people about, well, this isn't right, this isn't right. It is what it is. I'm making this entire thing pretty much out of styrene and tubing. So here I'm taking some sculpting wire and I'm wrapping it around a ferrule, which is wrapped around a piece of aluminum tubing, just to give some semblance of something that looks semi like a turbo with an intake on the other end of it. It passes. Excuse me. Then at that point, I have to make an engine. I still, there's nothing I own everything I own is kind of V8 related. So that's going to be the next step. If you notice, I put some little radiators, cooling vents on the back side behind the driver's and the passenger's door. Here, I'm just taking some thin styrene rod and making like exhaust hoses, cooling hoses, nothing fancy. It was just easier to use styrene than it was to use any kind of wire. So here I'm using some half-round styrene going on a 1/4-inch styrene block. That's going to be my intake with my, I'm going to call them rocker covers on the side, and just use some thin Tamiya cement. This stuff works really good. Takes a little while to dry, but it's just so easy to work with that, it's much better than super glue. It doesn't get everywhere, and it's thin, and you can be very precise on where you put it. So I need to make a base for where my motor is going to sit. So once again, I break out the styrene, and I actually measure things instead of just eyeing it like I usually do, which never really works out well if you watch any of my videos. I'm not a huge styrene person. I'm trying to get into it more and forcing myself to do builds like this so I can get more comfortable with it, because practice makes perfect. And the more you suck at something, the more you do it, the better you get. And I really sucked. So figured I would go and kind of force myself to do this. And it worked out pretty well. Once again, I forced myself through this whole project. I was like pushing myself to keep going and stay motivated. Then on the back, I wanted to make a little bit of a wing, sort of, to not hide the exhaust, but to shield the exhaust. Excuse me, and finish off the car that way. I think it just looks better. Instead of just a flat piece, it looked really silly. So once again, this was just a very precise thing. Then once it's all together, you can kind of see what I'm after for the look and the feel. At this point, I'm extremely happy, waiting for the other foot to drop, that something's going to go wrong and something's not going to fit, even though I fit it 5 times. But it's ready for black primer on the base, gray primer on the body, and then I'm using a petty blue from Splash Paints. And I wanted to use this, and I wanted to use Splash Paints because I wanted the base coat clear coat system, because I'm not going to clear coat it. I'm going to matte clear it. So after the paint has been applied, I'm using just a little bit of tape just to kind of mask off a few areas. And I'm going to use ink pens to highlight all the black that you would see on a Fiero behind the windows, the mirror, the rubber molding that would go down the side of the door, in the fender in the front. Then I break out my new War Paints Fanatics Army Painter paints, and I honestly I know I say it almost every video now since I've gotten it. I really, really like these paints. They go on so nice, and the coverage is awesome. So I'm definitely sold on Army Painter paints, and we'll be using them from here on forward until something better comes along. But I can't imagine that happening. So this is just a long, boring process of painting. The intake I'm painting with silver and putting a base coat on the rocker covers, because I'm going to paint the rocker covers blue, but I wanted something other than black as a base. Then I'm going to paint the exhaust tips, even though those were I didn't show it in the video because it was just so tedious. My hands were going to be in the way, like they are in most of my videos. Those are ferrules as well. I put 4 of those in the middle. The I would call radiator hose, even though it's not really a hose, I painted it silver. And then I mixed 2 colors of paint for blue to try to get as close as I could to the petty blue so I can do all the details like the seats and the rocker covers. And it was pretty close, I think, for the most part. It's hard to get an exact match when you're using a brush compared to the airbrush. So I put a light coat on first using a slightly lighter color. That just gave me a little bit of flexibility when I went back over it with just slightly darker. It helped it fill in a little bit better and gave it more coverage, and I liked the way it looked. Other than that, this car went together really, really well. And it should have, considering how many times I put it together and took it apart. If you ever did customs, you go to put it together and all of a sudden it's like, crap, I forgot about this, or I didn't test it with the window in it and the window's hitting. There's always something that you forget. So here's all the little parts that I have going into it. You'll notice a little piece of styrene rod painted silver. That's going to be for my front splitter. Again, something I couldn't show online because my hands are in the way. That's what I started with. This was halfway through with everything primed, and this is the finished product. Once again, it's more of a hyper-realistic type of car. There's no rhyme or reason to what I did, except for I was trying to mimic that initial picture that I showed you to a degree using some creative freedom. I like it. I like the way it came out. It's not something you see every day. I like to be different, even at the risk of, sucking. And hopefully this gives some inspiration to others to do things other than wheel swaps and paint or decals and wheels, just something a little bit different. It's not perfect. It's not going to be perfect. That's not who I am. For me, it's all about inspiration, and I got inspiration from somebody. And hopefully you can get some inspiration from this. But other than that, that's it. And thank you for watching. I've got a lot coming up on the channel. I got a Ghostbusters Ecto 1 build. I've got an RC build with a model body. But other than that, I will catch you on the next one.